Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, why breaking up is hard to do. And that's especially true if you're the UK Prime Minister trying to sort out your relationship with the 28-member European Union. David Cameron went to Brussels this week to work out an alternative to a Brexit, paving the way for a referendum. But what cost on a parting of ways? Also this week, the big freeze in the desert. Saudi Arabia and Russia came here to Doha and agreed to cap their levels of oil production. But was it just a big non-event? Will it actually have any real impact on an oversupplied and jittery oil market?
I'm Scott Heidler at the Singapore Air Show. This is a region that has seen air travel boom over the last 10 years. But is that going to change now that the economies are slumping? We'll have that story coming up.
So it's approaching make or break time for the European Union, the United Kingdom, and indeed Prime Minister David Cameron, as the reality of an EU referendum and maybe even the so-called Brexit hits home. It is a tricky situation. Cameron wants to stay in the Union, but not under the current rules, while back at home he has to counter the anti-Europe feelings brought on by the refugee crisis. So the Prime Minister went to Brussels armed with a package of reforms. And he wants controversial concessions, the kind which require an actual change in EU treaty terms. But the reforms are just one part of the situation, because with or without them, there will be a referendum in the UK, which will settle its membership of the EU once and for all. This was David Cameron talking tough as the Brussels talks began.
It's going to be hard. I'll be battling for Britain. If we can get a good deal, I'll take that deal, but I will not take a deal that doesn't meet what we need. I think it's much more important to get this right than to do anything in a rush. But with goodwill, with hard work, we can get a better deal for Britain.
And off he went. So he's pushing hard because this is something that will have implications for people and businesses across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. We will start this week with Emma Hayward in Manchester in northern England, who went to find out exactly what's at stake there.
At Newland Engineering in Manchester, they work together like a family. They've been making conveyor belts since the 60s. This one will go to Djibouti, but they also sell inside the EU. So what role Britain plays within a future Europe is important here.
If we could remain as members, but with less of the red tape, more flexibility to do some of our own legislation and not be controlled by Brussels, I think that would be an ideal scenario.
David Cameron wants to stay inside the EU family, but is looking to overhaul Britain's relationship with it. So what is he pressing for? His proposed reforms include restricting benefits for up to 4 years for EU migrants arriving in Britain, and to be able to opt out of the EU's drive to pursue an ever closer union across Europe. Plus, he wants to put a stop to the financial regulation which some believe is strangling business in Britain. The idea of one of Europe's biggest economies potentially going it alone has prompted questions about what an EU without Britain or a Britain without the EU might look like.
Really what's at stake, I suppose, is this sovereignty issue, the clash of individual nations' interests and that of the wider European Union. And that's where Cameron's getting coming up against resistance, because there are countries, particularly those of the East, that are saying, well, actually, we don't want to water down the rights of our citizens who perhaps are migrating to places like Britain.
Back at Newlands, they're getting ready to send stock abroad, not knowing if the path ahead will run quite so smoothly if Britain is taken down a different track. Emma Hayward for Counting the Cost in Manchester.
So earlier in the week, I spoke to Karel Lannoo, who is the CEO of the Brussels-based Centre for European Policy Studies. Now, he very much believes both the UK and the EU will lose out if that different track Emma was talking about is taken. Karel and I started by talking about London's economic standing, as he describes it, the New York of Europe.
Exactly, that's what it is today. It's the same like what Wall Street is for the US and like what Hong Kong is for a large part of China. And it has acquired its status over the last 20 to 25 years, but it's basically the financial center, the business center, the most important business capital in Europe.
And so what is your view then if the UK was to make the decision to leave the European Union? What would be your projections almost for what could happen?
I think they will lose a lot. They don't accept this for the time being, but they just do not sufficiently realize that the status they have acquired today is closely related to basically freedoms which we have in the single market, and these freedoms are the possibility, if you're established in one place in the EU, you can do business all over the EU, and they do this for financial services, for business services, but for a whole reason of activities from London. The moment they leave the EU, and if they were to decide to do so, that would be finished from one day to the next. So meaning you have to be in the EU to have this, what they call the single passport, this passporting, the single license. Once you're outside the EU, you lose that possibility, meaning the centralization of business activities, which we have seen in London over the last 20, 25 years, which have gone in parallel with the achievement of the single market, will again fragment over different places in Europe, or we will see another main financial center emerging in Europe. That could be Paris, that could be Frankfurt, it could be other places. But that, of course, remains to be seen.
So do you believe that business people in the city and that, well, frankly, anyone who is to vote in this referendum, that they're understanding these potential ramifications or what you believe would be the ramifications?
From the discussions I've got in London and conferences and debates with people, only a few experts understand this, but many people in the city do not sufficiently appreciate this. I think, for example, people within American banks, within fund management industry may understand it, but the broader public, first of all, doesn't understand it. Many people, for example, in the hedge fund industry in London, do not want to appreciate it as such. They see just simply more and more regulation coming from Brussels rather than seeing these liberties or these freedoms to provide services coming from Brussels. But I think also a big part of the business community in the UK at large doesn't see that sufficiently.
What do you think? Well, much is made about what David Cameron has to do. He's trying to basically renegotiate Britain's position within the EU. Financially speaking, economically speaking, business speaking, what do you think he has to try to get from Brussels if the UK stays in a reformed EU?
Basically, is what we've seen is what is on the table is there were about 4 questions which Cameron has asked to the EU. So 4 specific concessions from the EU. We have seen a draft response to these concessions from the EU. What we need to see is a kind of a political, a diplomatic response from the EU to these questions. But some of these questions are difficult and may imply concessions which go too far for other member states, or concessions which raise precedents for other member states, or concessions which could unravel this single market which we in the EU have been for a long time proud of. And that is the problem. I mean, they are asking to some extent things which are irreconcilable. If I think about this word ever closer union, which Britain or the British government does not longer want to have in the EU treaty, they want this, and at the same time they want more single market. They want to have even more possibility to do business from London, from the UK, in the EU through this strengthening of the single market for services. But on the other hand, they don't want more closer union, which I do not understand.
Just very quickly, effect on currencies. Obviously, the euro's been through a lot of weakness in the last few years, but the pound is traditionally a very strong currency. Again, if the UK decouples like that, what could be the potential effect on the pound?
Yeah, first of all, the pound has not always been a strong currency. The pound, for example, in 2008, 2009 was a weak currency, was at par with the euro, has strengthened only in the last 2 years with the strength of the UK economy. What we've seen over the last weeks again is that because of the uncertainty of a possible Brexit, the currency has started to decline again. So it's already a kind of a sign from the markets that the markets think it wouldn't be a good thing for the UK to leave the EU.
Karel Lannoo, pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, a 6,000% rise in petrol prices and a currency devaluation. But it might still not be enough to rescue Venezuela's flailing economy, and there's a risk it could stir unrest as well. We're back to the oil story in this part of the programme because it doesn't go away, does it? Although I will say that at least this past week we had something tangible, sort of. oil ministers from Saudi Arabia and Russia came here to Doha, along with counterparts from Venezuela and Qatar, and surprised pretty much everyone by agreeing to freeze their oil production at January levels. It was the first deal struck between an OPEC and a non-OPEC player in 15 years. But there had to be a but, didn't there? The deal only holds if other major crude producers do the same. Now, imagine asking Iran to freeze production levels when it's only just made its first shipments of crude to Europe after years of sanctions. Oddly, though, Iran didn't commit to the plan but said it did support it. This is why I said we sort of had a deal. It doesn't take a single barrel of oil off the market and was really the bare minimum that could have been done. Still, the Saudi oil minister thought it was a good start.
It is a beginning of a process which we will assess in the next few months and decide whether we need other steps to stabilize and improve the market. We don't want significant gyrations in prices. We don't want reduction in supply. We want to meet demand, and we want a stable oil price.
But will they get that from this deal? Joining us from Moscow to talk about it is Vitaly Kazakov. He is a Master of Economics in Energy and Natural Resources at the New Economics School there. Vitaly, the deal, the Doha deal between Saudi Arabia and Russia, wasn't really a deal, was it? I mean, it was the absolute bare minimum that could have been done, and I wonder if it's going to have any real impact at all. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if we cut the summary of the deal short, there was no deal. And the major outcome of the agreement in Doha is that there was no agreement. But it was put in a positive way. To say that we freeze oil production is the same as to say that we did not agree to cut oil production. But the message exactly is the same.
So, okay. Let's look for some significance then. Is there something in the fact that a major OPEC player and a major non-OPEC player did actually sit down and talk to each other? Is that something?
I think it's mainly politics, and to a less extent the underlying economics and the underlying trends in the sector. Speaking about the Russian side, it's widespread belief in the Russian officials, both on the oil industry side and among the Russian statesmen, that the fall in the oil price that we have seen in the last couple of years is primarily a result of the speculators on the financial markets. So as a result, they want to address the psychological aspect of the market. They want to scare speculators away. They want to send the strong message to the market that the producers, both inside OPEC and outside OPEC, are strong enough to, they can speak, they can communicate, they can reach some agreements, and they can agree on some tangible agreements. But actually, it doesn't happen, I mean, volume-wise. That's the Russian agenda. On the Saudi Arabia side, probably they're actually pretty much sticking to what they have decided to do some time ago. They decided to increase volumes. They decided to probably push as a result, oil price down. They decided to fight the new entrants to the market. I mean, the new entrants over the last 10 years, which is the shale oil and shale gas producers, primarily in the US. And they pretty much stick to what they decided to do. So it's nothing has changed on the Saudi side over their course of action.
And then we bring Iran into the picture as well. The idea from Saudi Arabia and Russia was that, well, we'll only make the freeze if they make it too, and if other producers do as well. Now, expecting Iran to agree to some sort of freeze was just ridiculous, wasn't it? I mean, they're only just coming back into the market, and frankly, they will want to take everything they can in that situation.
I totally agree. Actually, if you look at this deal in its current form, actually it does not imply the partnership of the equals. Because if you look at the Russian side, Russia is currently producing at close to its historical all-time high levels. Same applies to Saudi Arabia, who produces just close to all-time high historical levels. If you look at Iran produces probably about 70%-ish of its potential capacity. and quite naturally wants to get back to its close to 100% situation. And the deal in its current form does not offer Iran this option. So quite naturally, they oppose this type of agreement. So I think if all the other players within OPEC would agree to cut production, they would gain on the pricing side more than they would lose on the volume side.
Just a quick final thought, and this is going back to the fact that the talks were held here in Doha. It was the Qataris who brokered these talks, and I found that kind of interesting because it was all happening outside of the OPEC umbrella. You remember the Nigerians, they wanted an emergency OPEC meeting, but they weren't granted it. And here we have things happening outside of OPEC. Is that significant in itself?
I think right now OPEC is dysfunctional. Maybe it's a strong word, but actually there is no difference right now whether there is OPEC in place at the moment or there is no OPEC. Because Saudis primarily do what they want to do. Everyone else is just doing what they want to do. For the first time in history, well, maybe not in history, but at least for the first time in many years, they did not provide any guidance on the targeted volume production volumes, as you know, at their latest meeting in December last year. And to me, it says that, well, there is practically no OPEC at the moment. Everyone fights for himself. That's the message the last OPEC meeting sent to the rest of the world.
Vitaly Kazakov there with his views on the big oil non-deal. Vitaly, thank you so much for your time this week.
Thank you.
As we mentioned, Venezuela was part of those oil talks here in Doha, and it really needs the oil price to lift. The economy there is close to collapse from a combination of those lower oil prices, plus years of economic mismanagement and soaring inflation. And so, under pressure to ease the crisis, President Nicolas Maduro hiked petrol prices for the first time in 20 years and sharply devalued the currency, the bolivar. Now, that combination means prices at the pump will jump from near zero to as much as 85 US cents a litre. The move risks sparking protests in a volatile country where citizens are struggling with soaring inflation and a shortage of basic goods already. More in this report now from Virginia Lopez.
The streets of Caracas, where unregulated fruit sellers like these offer a reliable and cheap supply of produce. For one of its customers, Carolina Blanco, finding food she can afford is a daily struggle. Carolina fears that as petrol prices rise, so will all costs associated, like transporting these goods.
Considero que lo de la gasolina era justo y necesario.
It was a fair and necessary increase, but the cost of living is going to skyrocket. We'll have to work more and adapt in order to survive. If peppers cost more, we'll have to season food with something else.
President Nicolás Maduro did on Wednesday what very few Venezuelan presidents have done. Faced with one of the worst performing economies in the world, Maduro had no option but to raise the price of petrol.
We're installing a new system to charge for petrol. We will charge for it because at the moment we're paying to pump it into cars.
President Maduro was referring to fuel subsidies so high they don't even cover the cost of production. For the first time in 20 years, the government has decided to raise the price of petrol. It will now cost 6,000% more to fill up a tank. Although it might seem insufficient, this measure will have a huge impact on the life of Venezuelans. For analysts, the measures help, but not tremendously, and they could potentially backfire.
The losses from controlling the price of petrol were more than $10 billion, which make a brutal difference for Venezuela. This adjustment will increase the price of everything, but it will also ease the pressure.
More than 25 years ago, similar measures spurred a wave of protests that lasted days and reportedly left thousands dead. Fear of a repeat of that sort of violence has weighed heavily on Venezuela's leaders over the years. But with the economy on the brink of collapse, it's a risk that this time President Maduro could not avoid.
Finally this week, we're at the Singapore Air Show, where IATA, the International Air Transport Association, called on the government of Thailand to urgently address aviation safety. Bangkok is the fourth most visited city in the world, making aviation the real backbone of Thailand's tourism industry. But there's a fear that growth is coming at the expense of safety. Scott Heidler's our man at the air show in Singapore.
1 out of every 3 airline passengers in the world last year took off or landed in the Asia-Pacific region. Growing middle classes and new markets are pushing industry numbers up. Last year, the number of passengers here grew 8% more than anywhere else in the world. A soaring demand for more flights means the need for more airports. Industry leaders say if governments remain focused on global standards, there's no reason why growth should come at the expense of safety. After the U.S. aviation regulator in December downgraded Thailand's safety rating, that issue is more in focus than ever.
There's some wake-up calls around the region where the United States FAA, for example, has downgraded the Thailand. And there are some other countries around the region where I believe governments are now having to work to step up to the plate.
Many new airlines have taken to the air. That's causing established airlines to rethink how they operate. In financial trouble, Thai Airways is in the middle of restructuring. This puts it at a disadvantage in the short term, but may make it more competitive in the longer term.
While we are restructuring, which means our cost base is high, most of our competitor, because of the oil price, they keep dropping the price as well, right? I mean, whereas their cost base is low.
The growth of the airline industry here in Asia Pacific has been so rapid over the last 10 years, there are concerns that the infrastructure is not keeping pace and that airlines are scrambling for experienced pilots and proper training. Years ago, most airline pilots came from the military. Not anymore.
The training of pilots is done by airlines and flying schools, and that system works well, but it does again have to keep pace with the growth in demand. Airlines can always find enough pilots, but they may not like what they have to pay them.
That means regional shortages of pilots drive up salaries. So while the demand for these seats is increasing in Asia Pacific, there are challenges. For the airlines, the challenge is to expand carefully in this era of thinning profit margins. And for the governments to make sure that safety standards do not slide as the industry expands and demands new, busier airports. The figures show the last 5 years of commercial aviation have been safer than the previous 5. This is a trend airlines and governments will want to maintain. Scott Heidler for Counting the Cost, Singapore.
And while Scott was in the region, and after talking to Thai Airways, he also took a wider look at Thailand's economy. And there is a major issue there, the ageing population. It means a shrinking workforce, less output, and therefore less money for the government to operate on, and more Thais working beyond the age of retirement.
It's not uncommon for a Thai grandmother to be cooking all day long. But for 73-year-old Noi Lertnam Chitrong, she's cooking to earn money, not to serve her grandchildren their favorite meal.
I don't want to rely on my children. I am not a disabled person. I can work. We don't have any assets or properties. I have to earn money myself to make a living.
Noi's situation is becoming more common in Thailand. The stagnating economy and the rising cost of living means people need to stay working longer to put food on the table. 40% of the 10 million Thais over the retirement age of 60 are still working. But it's not just the aging population here in Thailand that's putting a drain on the economic future. A drastic reduction in the fertility rate is also playing a major role. There's an average of 1.5 children in each household now. That's 4 less children in each family than the average back in 1970. As a result, in just over 20 years, Thailand's workforce will be 11% smaller, the fastest contraction amongst its developed neighbors in Southeast Asia.
To re-employ the older person, or to extend the retirement age, or to promote the employment of older working population is the necessary condition for Thai economy.
Adding difficulty for those looking to retire, the Thai pension system is extremely fragmented. Analysts say that to help reduce the cost of elderly care in the future, the pension system needs to be reworked. But for 65-year-old Boonpan Simariyang, it's too late. He'll have to continue mending clothing on a Bangkok sidewalk as long as his body allows.
I have to keep going until my eyes fail me. While I can still see, I'll carry on.
And unless some changes are made, more Thais will have to spend their golden years working.
And that's our show for this week, but there is more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page with individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us by tweeting me at KamalAJE. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.